GT7's 1.13 update, of course the most significant update in April, has brought the return of a legendary K-car, a car which has been a part of the franchise for a long time, but then of course was not in GT Sport and now has come back in GT7, the Suzuki Cappuccino. Great name for a small car, of course falling under the same K-car regulations as all of the other models like this, the Honda Beat, of course the Mazda Autozam as well, also featured in older Gran Turismo games, and I've always found these to be a fascinating category of vehicle because Japan has, in a similar way to some other countries, but you could say more so than most, had to work within much stricter restrictions when it comes to their cars, with of course stuff like the NSX, the Skyline, the Evo, all working around 280 horsepower, at least officially. Of course in reality a lot of them went higher than that, and then the K-car category having around these 660cc engines, about 62, 63 horsepower, usually turbo aspirated more often than not, and of course restricted by size as well. But one of the great things about humans, especially engineers, is that by giving them restrictions, by making their job harder in effect, you can actually produce brilliance. And K-cars are a perfect example of that, because these are such good little cars in terms of performance. Now on a personal note, I've always liked the Cappuccino more, to be honest, than at least two of its main rivals, those being of course the Honda Beat, and also a car which hasn't returned yet but was in older Gran Turismo games, of course the Mazda Autozam. The Autozam always felt kind of like a mini supercar to me in that kind of category, and of course the Honda Beat is a staple of that category within Gran Turismo as well. But I like the fact that the Cappuccino has almost like this traditional sports car approach of being front-engine rear-wheel drive rather than mid-engine like the Honda and the Mazda. Now of course, due to those K-car regulations, you're not working with crazy specs. The engine is obviously around 660cc, it only puts out 62 horsepower, but of course being tiny, it is essentially like driving a shoe, it only weighs 700 kilos. Now, of course, front-engine rear-wheel drive, it is turbo-aspirated, and the performance points, as you would expect, are very low as well. In fact, it's not even 300 points, at least in its stock form, 292. Now, in the used dealer, which is where you, at least for now, have to find this car, and of course if you're watching this on the day of release, that's where you can still find it, it costs 20,000 credits exactly. So the question, of course, is the car worth picking up? Well, we can answer that fairly simply. For that kind of price, why wouldn't you want to pick it up? It's dead cheap. But also, how does it compare to those rivals? Well, that's an interesting question, because one of the things about K-cars, because they are so restricted in terms of size, weight, engine, power, when they're all working in such lower level and such similar parameters, more so than you could say most other categories of performance car, even some of the JDM legends, it means that the differences between them don't tend to be as crazy. So, for example, if you were to compare GT cars or supercars, then having a front engine compared to a mid-engine is going to make the car drastically different. For example, if you were to compare, let's say, two high-performance 500 horsepower super sports cars, something like a Dodge Viper with the front-mounted 500 horsepower V10, to, I don't know, something like maybe an Audi R8 V10, with a mid-engine, similar kind of power. They handle completely differently, not just because of the placement of the engine, for a number of reasons of course, but that's the point that I'm making. You know, the differences are drastic despite some similarities. With K-cars, that doesn't tend to be as much the case. It's not as apparent. The cars are much more similar, so I'm not saying that, you know, you take this thing out on a track and you're going to be drifting all over the place, whereas the Honda Beat feels focused and precise and like a little race car in comparison. No, that's simply not the case. And another great thing about K-cars is the mix of all-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, front-wheel drive. You've got something like the Daihatsu Copen, which I actually used to win the K-car endurance event. It's one of the least desirable K-cars there is. It's a jelly bean with a steering wheel, and it's front-wheel drive. But it just goes to show that all of these platforms can simultaneously work within those rules and parameters, but be, to some degree, just as effective as long as you tune them correctly. So in a funny kind of way, despite how easy it could be for all K-cars to feel like a real-life version of Road Trip Adventure where they're just the same thing with a different body, they actually don't. The performance isn't radically different, but the feel is. This feels different to a Copen, which feels different to a Beat. At the same time though, they all feel competitive. They are all great choices of rivals to each other, and it really allows for so much personal preference and personal expression. So for me, I would go for a Cappuccino. I like the look of it, I like the layout, and there's just something about it being a front-engine rear-wheel drive sports car which is just kind of hilarious to me. Then someone else might prefer the Honda Beat, that kind of boxier, mid-engine layout, almost a mini NSX, you might be able to fool yourself into thinking. And then you got the Daihatsu, again, completely different, more of like a hot hatch kind of layout, the front engine, front drive. It's awesome to me how there is so much fun to be had within this category. So this is not the kind of car that's going to blow your mind. Don't go into that expecting it, and to be honest, I don't think many people are. But if you do find these to be cars that don't interest you, or are just silly or stupid fun, please give them a try, because even untuned, you would be surprised just how fun the racing can be with vehicles like this. Because as I've said in some of my car reviews, and especially in bike reviews, when you have less power, you can actually use more of it. So yes, you've only got 62, 63 horses, but you're using every single one of them at pretty much all times. You can throw them through corners, you can sometimes not even brake at all, and although they're not as quick as basically anything else in the game, they are so much fun. Plus at the same time, when you tune them up, you can get some surprisingly good laps out of these things, especially on really tight technical circuits such as the Nordschleife, because you can just keep such a high average speed that even though they're not as quick on the straights, they can fly through corners almost like a tiny version of like a touring car or a rally car. So yeah, if you haven't bought one already, it goes without saying you should definitely try at least one. And yeah, I think it's a cool addition to the game, or in this case more of a returning face, if you will. It's not going to rock anyone's world, but it's a nice addition. Ultimately, that's it for my thoughts on the Cappuccino. Of course, drop yours down below if you've tried the car, or if you haven't yet. What are your expectations for it? I wouldn't have thought many people would have extremely high expectations, but of course stick around on the channel for more. I will be reviewing, of course, the new other Subarus in this update as well. But until next time, I'll see you then, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.